Subcommittee will come to order. Good afternoon, everyone, and we want to thank the Administrator of the SBA, Maria Contreras-Sweet, for joining with us here this afternoon. I believe this is her first appearance this Congress in the 114th Congress. She's always a welcome visitor to us, and I want to particularly acknowledge and thank her for coming to my district a couple of weeks ago to Cincinnati, and we together had a number of events, toured in the area called Over the Rhine, a number of small businesses, as well as a credit union, and met with the chamber, did a town meeting, and a whole range of things. And she was obviously extremely knowledgeable, and I think made a wonderful impression on the people of Cincinnati, and we thank you for coming. I really do. Today, the committee will hear from the Administrator about the President's fiscal year 2016 budget request. Two questions arise. First, are the resources sufficient to help small businesses grow the middle-class jobs that America needs? And second, are the resources allocated in an open and transparent manner? It's important to note that there are numerous other policies that are as critical for small businesses as those that will be raised today. Among those are the following. Small businesses deserve tax reform because the current code is so complex it makes their lives miserable. They need a regulatory regime that...
The Department has been judicious in controlling cost, reducing procurements, stretching developments, and delaying modernization. However, these actions necessarily add cost to our programs, add risk to our industrial base, and add risk to our ability to meet the defense strategic guidance. If we are forced to execute at BCA levels in fiscal year 2016 and beyond, these cuts will go deeper, and we fundamentally change our Navy and Marine Corps and the industrial base we rely upon. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. We look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Admiral, are you up next, or General? Which one's going to go? General, I think you're up next, and thank you for being here, and we yield you the floor.
Thank you, Chairman Forbes, Ranking Member Courtney, distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for this opportunity to testify before you today. The Marine Corps' ability to serve as our nation's premier crisis response force is due in a large part to this subcommittee's continued strong support. And on behalf of all Marines, I'd like to say thank you. The current situation is chaotic. This committee has heard from numerous witnesses this year who have characterized the global security situation as one that is rapidly changing and increasingly complex. These multidimensional challenges highlight the increasingly broad range of warfighting capabilities our military must possess to ensure success on the battlefield. While these challenges are global in nature, they increasingly occur in areas that have a maritime component. Increased competition for limited natural resources, demographic shifts to the coastal urban centers, territorial disputes over maritime borders will continue to contribute to future conflict. These conflicts will require a robust naval force that can respond rapidly from the sea. Your Navy Marine Corps team provides the means to ensure our national interests remain protected. Forward deployed, forward stationed forces enable us to respond to today's crisis with today's force today. These forces are characterized by their flexibility and their ability to loiter indefinitely to provide a deterrent and, when required, to project power ashore at the place and the time of our choosing. They provide our nation's leadership decision space necessary to make informed decisions during rapidly evolving situations. Amphibious warships with embarked Marines are crucial enablers to these capabilities. Referred to as the Swiss Army knife of the fleet, they are versatile, interoperable warfighting platforms capable of going into harm's way and providing diverse capabilities unlike any other naval platform. However, demand for these ships and embarked capabilities far outpace the available inventory. Because of inventory shortages, the Marine Corps has invested in land-based special-purpose Marine Air Ground task forces and is exploring on how to best leverage existing alternative sea-based platforms to generate enhanced littoral mobility, maneuver capabilities for our Marine Corps forces positioned in Europe, Africa, and Pacific areas of operation. Due to the generosity and foresight of Congress, our nation will greatly benefit from LPD 28, the 12th ship in the San Antonio class, which is now programmed. When that ship comes online, your naval forces will have an additional capability to respond to crisis. This remarkable line of amphibious ships has proven itself since 2006 and has provided tremendous capability to deployed amphibious-ready groups in our embarked Marine. The recent decision to base the Dock Landing Ship Replacement, or LXR, on the San Antonio hull form will provide a much improved capability and capacity. In particular, enhanced command and control, aviation operations, and maintenance capabilities will enable this ship to conduct independent operations and further expand the operational reach of our forward deployed forces. The future amphibious fleet is one that is characterized by its rapid flexibility and interoperability with the joint force. No one platform will prove transformational. It will be the combination of existing amphibious warships, alternative platforms from Military Sea Lift Command and the Maritime Preposition Force, with ships such as the Joint High-Speed Vessel and the Mobile Landing Platform with the Advanced Forward Staging Base that will enable us to achieve our full potential. Your Navy and Marine Corps team is committed to conducting the experimentation, wargaming, and dedicated planning to ensure that we invest wisely in our future force to generate the most value for every platform in the inventory. Our forward stationed and deployed Marines remain our nation's 911 force in readiness, and the investments that we are making in the future will ensure that they remain poised to do so. In partnership with the Navy, the Marine Corps looks forward to working with you to address these issues. I thank you for this opportunity and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, General. Admiral?
Sir, thank you. Chairman Forbes, Ranking Member Courtney, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. I am honored to be here today to testify on behalf of your Navy Seapower and Projection Forces. I welcome the new members of the subcommittee. I look forward to working with you all as we work on the 2016 budget. In developing this 2016 President's Budget, we carefully analyzed the needs of our nation and Navy in order to meet the missions of the Defense Strategic Guidance and the most recent Quadrennial Defense Review. This analysis looked at ends, ways, and means necessary to fight and win today's wars while building the ability to win tomorrow's, to operate forward to deter aggression, and be ready to fight and responsibly employ our diverse force. We remain committed to the rebalancing the majority of our naval forces to the Asia-Pacific, with 60% of our ships and planes in that region by 2020. However, with the reality of the current federal budget limitations and our commitment to do our part in bringing our nation's fiscal house in order, we have made difficult choices to best balance capability, capacity, readiness, and our industrial base, and still meet the missions of defense strategy, albeit with some risk. Our 2016 budget represents what we feel is the minimum necessary for our Navy to continue to be where it matters, when it matters. It reflects difficult choices and actions we had to take due to shortfalls over the last 3 years. Thus, any reduction in 2016, whether it be from sequestration or action by Congress to set some level of funding in between, would be extremely challenging. I'd like to reiterate what Secretary Stackley said. The Navy is down $25 billion over the last 3 years due to sequestration and the bipartisan budget acts. That has required us to adapt and modify what we're doing. At the same time, this needs to stop. We are hanging on, we are making do. But the threats we face, trying to defend this country, they don't have to make do. If limited sequestration level funding, the nation would need to think about what kind of military we can afford and how we'd need to reprioritize in that situation. That analysis would need to factor in the global environment, the nation's defense priorities, America's role in the international security system, and the capabilities and threats of our adversaries, as well as timing of sequestration and the method of implementation. That analysis will dictate what kind of cuts would be required. You have to do that analysis first, revise our defense strategy before talking about specific impacts. We fight as a joint force, we must adjust as a joint force. We ask for your support in providing the strategy-based Navy that our 2016 budget will sustain, and avoid the budget-based Navy that sequestration will give us. I look forward to answering your questions.
Admiral, thank you. As I mentioned earlier, I'm going to defer my questions to the end so the members can get their questions in. And so I'd like to go to Mr. Courtney and yield to him for any questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for your patience and your testimony. You know, Secretary Stackley, you talked about some of the modifications last year that Congress made to improve the initial submission that came over last January. And you know, I think it's important to note that this subcommittee actually kind of led the way in terms of those modifications, just for no other reason that we go first in this whole process. But again, if you look at the authorizing committees and appropriations committee, they pretty much followed the path that we started here. So we look forward to continuing that collaboration that made the best of a bad situation last year. One of and the chairman deserves a lot of credit, actually, for the great work that took place last year. Secretary Stackley, just to zoom in on one issue that you mentioned, and I'll let, again, the other members jump in. The Virginia Payload Program, which, again, is an attempt to try and, as quickly as possible, replace the strike capacity that we're going to lose when the SSGNs go offline. The plan that came over, again, talks about implementing that modification program in 2019 and 2020. The Joint Resources Oversight Council had talked about, again, trying to do that maybe even more robustly. And I was just wondering if you had any thoughts about possibly trying to accelerate that process in terms of the ability of the industrial base to handle it, and again, just sort of whether the Navy thinks that that's a plausible change that we can make to, again, fill that gap that's going to happen when the guided missiles.
Yes, sir. I appreciate the question. First, the SSGNs, the 4 SSGNs retire in the 2026 through 2028 window. When they retire, each of those boats carries missile tube capacity for 154 missiles. So you look at about 600 missile tube capacity exiting the fleet in the mid-2020s. The Virginia Payload Module approach is to buy back that capacity, but in doing so, it's adding 28 missile tubes per submarine, or 28 missile capacity per submarine. And so it's going to take a long time to recapitalize the capacity that goes out with the GNs in the mid-20s. The program plan is to commence installation of VPM, the Virginia Payload Module, with the next multi-year procurement in 2019. The design and development has all been paced to that milestone. If we're going to try to really hammer away at what will be a shortfall undersea strike capacity, the more we can do, the earlier we can do, the better for our nation. So what I have frankly committed in earlier discussions with your staff and in discussions on my side with the PEO for submarines and the industrial sector is to take a look at, can we in fact complete those design and development activities earlier than the 2019 timeframe, to give the Navy and the nation the option to determine whether or not we want to advance Virginia Payload Modules earlier in the submarine build cycle. So we're doing that work right now, and we're doing that in the context of the other submarine work that's all coming together at the same time. So we have Virginia Payload Module design, and then we would have the build that comes with that. That increases the capacity, the throughput that would have to take place in our submarine build yards. On top of the sea-based strategic deterrent, the Ohio replacement program, that's a 2021 start, but well before 2021, we're deep into design today, and we're going to be doing advanced construction activities at the same time. So we have to manage the total workload at the submarine yards. We have to determine, can we in fact accelerate the design and development activities to support an earlier introduction to Virginia Payload Modules, and then look at balancing the workload across the 2 yards to do that. We're doing those studies right now in concert, frankly, with an overarching study that we're doing, which is looking at how, in fact, are we going to build Ohio replacement in concert with the ongoing Virginia submarine construction, in concert with the introduction of Virginia Payload Modules, all within a couple of year window. So the answer is we're looking at it. We have the right people looking at it. I would ask you to give us a couple of months to complete our review, and we'll be ready to come back and give you more specifics in the March-April timeframe.
Would gentlemen yield? Mr. Secretary, we don't have a couple of months, so if you can narrow that scope down, it would be very, very helpful to us as we're looking to try to just accelerate a little bit of that. If it's not doable, it's not doable, but we've got some big gaps that are sitting out there. We just want to help you try to close those gaps. So anything you could get for us in a quicker time frame, at least for this year, might be helpful to do that. So I know you can only do what you can do, but we just make that request to you.
Yes, sir.
Good.
Sorry, I will tell you, just to complete the thought, though, I don't expect there's going to be, I don't anticipate change to the early activities.
Okay.
It's really to take a look at the back end of the fit-up
Gotcha.
to see if, because that's where the mountain of the work is. So
That's good. We recognize this time Mr. Knight from California for 5 minutes if he has any questions. No questions. Gentleman from Montana is recognized for 5 minutes if he has any questions. Then the Vice Chairman, Mr. Hunter, is recognized for five minutes if he has any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, good to see you. Thank you for being here. This is the first question. MLP, AFSB, you mentioned that general, I think we asked last NDAA to have some kind of a gap procurement from the Navy. It didn't go through. So if Congress finds a means to do that again, to provide the monies, is that good? I mean, do you want that? Do you need that? And can you put it to good use?
Sir, I think you're specifically referring to advanced procurement.
Yes.
To be able to close the production gap at NASCO associated with building the fifth of the MLP class, the third float forward staging base. The answer is yes, it is desirable. You don't see it in our budget because, frankly, the appropriators have marked it out each time we've tried to put it in. And so for us, it's a challenge to put funding in if we know the appropriator is going to mark it out. So if any assistance in that regard would be helpful to the industrial base, helpful to getting the capability earlier, but we recognize the challenge associated with the appropriator's view on that.
So I guess that kind of ties in, too, with amphibs, going from 38, which is a number that the Marine Corps and the Navy agreed upon that is needed to conduct the missions and the requirements from the combatant commanders throughout the world, right? So you go down from 38 to 33, you really only have 31. You don't have MLP and AFSB on track right now because there's no advanced procurement funding for it, right? So they're semi on track. We've now closed 3 embassies in the last 6 years, had to evacuate them using Marines. You have less land-based places where you can now stage out of. Is that not a priority for the Navy and the Marine Corps to be able to operate? You can't operate out of the embassies, can't operate off the land. You have to operate out of something. So what's the something?
Well,
it can't be hope and goodwill, right?
Well, let me start that the AFSB we just talked about is the third of the 3 that are planned. So the first 2 are on track. The third one is on track in terms of its full funding. The advanced procurement would allow that to effectively be brought to the left a year. So that capability
For the shipyard.
For the shipyard,
Right,
yes, sir.
right.
Yes, sir. That capability, we place increasing value on it, particularly as you've walked the ship, particularly as you see all the opportunity that it brings, all the lift capacity that it brings. And I know I'll let General Gluck describe exactly how the Marine Corps is looking at that in terms of forward operating base effectively to support Marine Corps operations. But it has held a high priority in terms of the Navy's budget since we started with the MLP program, and it's.
Let me ask it this way: Does it offset the number of amphibs that you need? Having a forward staging base like that, where you can lift and move, and does that offset the number of amphibs? Is that one reason for the lower number, or are they 2 totally separate things?
No, sir, that doesn't offset. As a matter of fact, if you look at, is that the force structure assessment will now actually go up to 34 ships because the LPD is being bought, and it actually modified that we have the third AFSB, and so they are not a substitute. What they are is enabler or other alternatives to put a special purpose MAGTF on or other national mission forces. In fact, when the AFSB was initially designed, it was going to be to amplify in mine hunting, and it actually was initially designed for 2 MH-53s and mine hunting gear, and we're going to be 2 of them to continue on. The value of that has now made itself very clear is that now we've designed and worked with NavAir, can take 4 V-22s on the same flight deck. And it's much more readily able to take the Marine Corps on it and also or national mission forces. So it doesn't offset the need, and we view it now as with the 12th LPD and the statement of now that's 34, we're closing that gap. It comes back to being how much money do we have? And we looked at it was AFSB's plugged in to the workload of an industrial base of NASCO, and as Mr. Secretary pointed out was AP would help. The ship will still execute. The first ship is christened on time, and we're looking forward to the AFSB getting out there. And where it goes is still under review. It could be in Africa, it could be in the Middle East, but we know it'll be helpful. Last summer, we took New York City out of cycle to go to the Mediterranean to embark on National Mission Force to catch a terrorist. Very quickly, they used a ship of opportunity. That ship is now in the Middle East. So what do we have to do? We double pumped that crew. They went over, embarked the special people, landed, took that individual back who is now in court in New York City awaiting trial. The ship came back, did a maintenance period, and now it's on deployment. The AFSB would give us the opportunity of having those AFSBs out there. You would still be able to embark Marines for rescue or special mission forces. And so that's how we view that ship in this important nest. And we are not detracting at all from the Marine Corps requirement for AMPIB, sir.
Perfectly done on timing, too, Admiral. Thank you. I yield
Congressman,
back.
if I could add to that, what you, you know, your numbers were correct that you said on the front, but the combatant commanders actually say the requirement's closer to 54. And I believe CNO has actually stated that it's probably, he knows it's over 50. So, you know, when you only have today we're sitting with 31 amphibious ships, you know, and you got a delta between 31 and 54. You know, we look at the AFSB and the MLP as ships that can help to fill that gap down the lower end of the military operational spectrum, not on the higher end. They have to be in a permissive environment. Now, the first AFSB, the Chesty Puller, was actually just christened about a week and a half ago. In fact, General Dunford was out there for the christening ceremony. And we see a lot of capability that there's potential in that ship. But once again, it's going to have to be in a permissive environment. You know, I've worked up actually a ConOps for the Commandant. That was something we could possibly use maybe in the Gulf of Guinea to be able to, you know, expand our reach of the V-22s down in that in the southern region of Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentlelady from Guam is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and it's nice to be back on the Seapower Subcommittee. Secretary Stackley, Admiral Malloy, and General Gluck, thanks you for your testimony today and for being here with us. Vice Admiral Malloy, I remember your service as Commodore of the Submarine Squadron 15 in Guam and your leadership during the successful dry docking of the submarine tender USS Frank Cable in Guam in 2004. And it's good to see you again. Last year, MSC sent the submarine tender Emery S. Land from Guam all the way back to the United States West Coast for its overhaul. Admiral, what is the impact on fleet readiness of sending ships from their Westpac AGRs back to the U.S. mainland for dry docking?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for your question and introduction, and also good to see you again. The impact ends up being, I said, essentially is in time. It takes about 2 to 3 weeks to transit, get the crew acclimated back. So we lose a month or two of that one. It is a constant balance of what we have to do. Our goal, stated by the CNO, is to commit and maintain a robust ship repair and maintenance capability in Guam. To be able to look at the spectrum of ships. And as you'd point out, the tenders have done maintenance in Guam. In some cases, we send them back. It really depends upon the sheer amount of work that has to be done about a life extension on a ship. And that's what we're studying right now as to what capacity we have to have forward versus back. But the actual loss of time is probably about 6 weeks of total time. It's really just the transit time that it requires.
Thank you very much, Admiral, for the information. And Secretary Stackley, in 2013, this committee raised serious concerns about the Navy's acquisition strategy to split pierside ship repair from dry docking depot-level capabilities in Guam. However, we understood that the dry docking depot-level capabilities would be restored as quickly as possible. In your July 2014 report on ship repair, you stated that this Navy is conducting a business case analysis to develop options for providing a dry docking capability in Guam. The results of this dry docking capability, BCA, will be provided to Congress later this fall. Commander U.S. Pacific Fleet has an operational requirement for a dry docking capability in Guam. When can we expect to see the BCA, and when can we expect to see the dry docking capability restored in Guam?
Let me first describe that the BCA that was the first go at the BCA, in fact, did not address whether or not the business case for a dry dock in Guam makes sense. what the BCA did was started with the assumption that there's a dry dock in Guam, and now what do we get out of it in terms of value? So it did not answer the first questions that, frankly, the CNO needs answered, which is, what will it cost to recapitalize the dry dock capability in Guam? What is the extent for usage? And there's going to be planned, and then we also have to consider emergent need for the dry dock. And then, in that case, does that argue for the investment in that dry dock capability? So right now, that analysis is being reworked by PAC Fleet. It's owed to the CNO so that we can make the right investment decisions regarding the dry dock capability.
When will we see the analysis? What is the time frame here?
I have to get back to you for the record, ma'am.
All right. Thank you very much, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Whitman, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Steckley, Vice Admiral Malloy, Lieutenant General Gluck, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for your leadership. Secretary Steckley, traditionally, as you look at aircraft carrier buys, we've done them in 2 ship procurements. And as you know, in the President's budget for 16, the proposal is for advanced procurement on CVN 78 in a 1-year time frame, and potentially moving CVN 79 to the right. We've seen with Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, as we purchase ships in groups, we've seen about a 15% savings when we do that, just because of certainty, especially for our suppliers for those ships, especially aircraft carriers. Is there any consideration given to grouping advanced procurement on CVN 80 and CVN 81? And give us your perspective, too, potentially on movement up to the right of CVN 79.
Well, let me start with the advanced procurement for CVN 80 and CVN 81. There's strong argument for why that makes great sense. When you're procuring an aircraft carrier about once every 5 years and you're relying on a very unique industrial base to do that, what you don't want to do is go through the start-stop cycle over a stretched period of time, and that's a big cost impact. Now, the challenge is, by the same token, the build cycle for a carrier is greater than 10 years. So CVN 79, for example, she started her advanced procurement in 2009, and then she will be delivering to the Navy in 2022. So that's a 13-year period. So when you talk about doubling down on buying material to support 2 carriers 5 years apart that have a 13-year build span, you're trying to buy material as much as 18 years ahead of when the carrier will enter the fleet. So it makes great sense looking at it just from the program's perspective on why we want to do that to drive the cost of the carrier down. There's risk associated with things like not necessarily obsolescence, but change associated with a carrier because the threat changes and that brings change. And then the investment that far in advance of when the asset actually enters the fleet. As the acquisition guy, I will argue for why we need to do that. Yeah. But getting through, carrying that argument all the way through to say that we're going to take the 80, which is a 2018 ship, the 81, which is a 2023 ship, buy material early for that 2023 ship delivering to the Navy in the mid-2030s. That's going to be it's going to be hard for me to carry the day in terms of our budget process. So we have to have the compelling case for the specific things that, from an industrial-based perspective, from a move the needle from a cost perspective, justify the combined buys of 80 and 81 together.
Well, it seems like even if the scale is an issue as far as how much you'd have to expend to do that and manage that within the budget, you could at least then identify those critical suppliers that look for certainty to make sure that they can continue providing those specialty parts. And if you could at least pare it down, again, at a critical mass to where you can demonstrate economies of scale saving, that you could at least say, these are the areas we need to maintain this industrial base, especially for small-scale suppliers that rely on certainty to continue that effort. So have you all given any thought to be able to scale it at least within that area, maybe not to get 15% savings, but still create certainty, make sure the suppliers are there, but also gain savings?
Yes, sir. We have a very concerted effort going on between the Navy and Newport News on all things cost-related to the CVN 78 class for all the right reasons. We are looking ahead at 80 which is a 2016, the advanced procurement starts in 2016 for the 80. Most of that's going to be nuclear material. But Newport News has brought the initiative to the table in terms of combined buys for material. And now we have to sort out, can we in fact come up with the right list of material that makes sense to buy early, to buy combined, to get the savings, and not just savings, people promising savings in the out years, but to actually be able to book the savings so we can drive down the cost of those carriers. So we are, I would say that we're working with industry on that. We've got a long way to go to be able to carry the day inside the budget process, first inside the building, and then again, I will tell you, we're going to have some challenges convincing some folks on the Hill that this makes sense to invest this early in a future aircraft carrier. And the other question you had about CVN 79 schedule. CVN 79 is the replacement for the Nimitz.
Yes.
And so when we struggled with, we have two things to struggle with. One is we want to build it earlier from the standpoint of efficiency with the shipyard. However, if we build it early, deliver it early, then we have an overlap between the 79 and the retirement of the CVN 68. What we can't afford to do is ramp up one extra aircraft carrier crew for a couple-year period.
Gotcha.
So what we're doing is we look at that as schedule flexibility. We're going to try to drive the CVN 79's construction to the left for efficiency purposes, but then we're going to look for a window, a second phase in the build process for the carrier, where we're going to bring in electronics, the electronic systems that will be obsolete if we were to buy them early. So we're going to buy them as late as possible, install them as late as possible, so that the systems that we install are in fact state of the fleet at the time that the carrier delivers.
Well, I think that's the key to make sure the overlap is there, so as Nimitz retires and CVN 79 comes on board, we don't go through the situation we were with Ford and Enterprise to make sure we don't have a gap there. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you so much. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. Langevin is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Secretary Stackley, General, Admiral. Thank you all for your testimony and all that you do to protect our nation. I'd like to start by expressing my appreciation for the significant efforts that the Navy has made to really push the art of the possible when it comes to cutting-edge technologies, be it directed energy, where the Ponce's deployment is teaching us so much right now, or the work being done to test railgun at sea and possibly integrate it into the third Zumwalt destroyer, or the UCAS-D program's work on pushing the state-of-the-art in unmanned carrier aviation. These are exactly the sorts of investments that we absolutely have to protect and allow to mature, that we have to protect and allow to mature to enable the Navy that we will need in the future. I know this is something the chairman and the ranking member care greatly, deeply about giving us our future Navy today, wherever possible. To our panel, let me just in particular ask: the Navy has projected a significant shortfall of land attack cruise missiles capability with the retirement of the guided missile submarines in the 2020s. To address this shortfall, Navy has proposed to expand the Virginia-class submarines to accommodate additional land attack cruise missiles capability, beginning with Block 5. However, even this effort, and assuming that all the payload space is used for land attack, will leave us significantly short relative to today's at-sea capacity. My questions are, what options exist to mitigate the shortfall and accelerate the introduction of Virginia payload module capability? And can you also please describe industry's ability to potentially accelerate the design, production, and the fielding of Virginia payload modules should additional resources be provided? What would be the earliest boat that could include VPM if it were accelerated?
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question. Let me start by describing that our design activities were all geared toward the first boat of the next multi-year, which is in 2019. We have posed to the design team, come back and tell us, is it possible to accelerate that? And that's an answer that I owe you later this spring in terms of what that would comprise. You've hit it exactly in terms of the capacity that leaves when we lose the 4 GNs. More than just the possibility of accelerating VPMs by a year, the other thing we have to work through is the total volume of work that the submarine industrial base will be taking on during the decade of the 20s to determine between our build rate for Virginia's side by side with our build rate of Ohio replacement alongside the Virginia payload modules. In that equation, is there the ability to, in fact, increase VPM production? Because right now we're planning on 1 Virginia per year with VPM beginning in 2019. So we're looking at, first, can we pull that to the left a year? And then the other thing, the other aspect is what would be our ability to increase the rate of production of VPMs beyond 1 per year, which is in our current long-range plan. Affordability comes into play, industrial-based capacity comes into play, and it's too early yet to call that.
Thank you. Going back to the subject of directed energy, obviously these systems have numerous applications on a variety of different ship types. Which PEO will be the lead organization for oversight and execution of shipboard laser systems?
Right now, laser systems right now are being developed under the direction of the Office of Naval Research. They'll get up to a certain level of technology maturity. Inside of the Naval Sea Systems Command, we have a program organization called Electric Ships Office, which includes power systems to support directed energy. Ultimately, a PEO for Integrated Warfare System would take on a responsibility for directed energy, and then the shipbuilding program would have responsibility for the shipboard side of integrating that weapon system, just like we do today with other conventional weapons. So Office of Naval Research today, working with our Naval Surface Warfare Center down at Dahlgren, Virginia, transition technology when it's mature to PEO IWS, working with PEO ships, most likely for integration on a future ship program.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back. Thank you, gentlemen.
The gentlelady from Missouri, Ms. Hartzler, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And before you, if you would just suspend for a moment, to our panelists, we're going to have votes. We're going to have to recess for about 40 minutes. Are you guys okay with coming back? We have 2 of our members that have questions they'd like to ask, if you don't mind doing that. So Ms. Hartzler will be our last question at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just quickly, you said in your testimony that with the shift to the Pacific, by 2020, did you say there'd be 60%?
Yes, ma'am, approximately 60% of the fleet.
Okay. I also read that if sequestration happens, you won't be able to have an aircraft carrier in the Mediterranean. Is that correct?
Right now, ma'am, the Mediterranean is covered on transit protection. We are still looking at, as I mentioned in my opening, the full extent of the Budget Control Act impacts on the Navy would require an adjustment of the entire joint force. So right now, we are able to supply what we call 1-0 presence in the Central Command in the Persian Gulf area around Saudi Arabia, and approximately 1-0 presence in the Pacific. What we provide presence in the Mediterranean and the Atlantic is what we call transit presence if we're moving through. But in the world situation detects, when Crimea was invaded, the carrier delayed in the Mediterranean before it went into the Middle East, and we then did a 2-week extension of the carrier in the Central Command, so that we still had that overlap. Our plan would still remain the same. For a long-term operation at a BCA level, I cannot tell you what carrier presence would be. We are taking a look at what opportunities are out there, but I will tell you is it remains bleak unless there is a fundamental change in strategy, what we have to do for the carrier presence around the world.
Thank you. Can you give me an update on the refueling of the George Washington?
Sir, you want to start that, sir?
I would just say we signed the planning contract with Newport News in February. There's a 30-month planning window, and so this is all the design activities. We start the material procurement to get everything in line so that when the GW shows up at the shipyard, she would start her nominally 44-month refueling complex overhaul. So that would be notionally the July 2017 timeframe would be the start of the RCOH, and it's pretty important we track to that schedule because what we want to do is minimize the extent of overlap with the next aircraft carrier, which is the Stennis. And so if that RCOH starts much beyond July of 17, then we get concerned about the combined 73, 74 RCOHs at Newport News during that period.
And lastly, can you compare the ship or the building of our submarines compared with what China is doing as far as building submarines? The numbers and capability?
I would have to come back to you with a direct answer for how many they've built per year, but on whole, they are producing submarines. They may not be the same quality, but their submarine force has grown over at a tremendous rate, that they now have more diesel and nuclear attack submarines than we have. So they've passed us in total quantity, but in quality, they're still not there. But they are producing some fairly amazing submarines, and they're actually deploying them. They've now had 3 deployments into the Indian Ocean. They're expanding where their submarines go, and of great interest. We know one SSBN was on a equivalent, we don't think they have nuclear weapons on board, but we've seen them producing the missiles and testing them. One SSBN did a 95-day period at sea, equivalent of a long patrol. So we know they are out experimenting and looking and operating, and certainly want to be in this world of advanced submarines.
I would highly recommend a classified threat brief for the members of the subcommittee, so we can go into detail so you can see beyond just submarines the level of activity that China has in terms of modernizing its force.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
And with that, we're going to recess until, for about 40 minutes till these 3 votes are over, and we'll come back and finish up with our last 2 questions. Gentlemen, first of all, thank you so much for your patience and working with us on this. As you know, they don't call us and ask if these votes are convenient, but we appreciate you working with us. And now we'd like to recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Cook, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for coming back. My question relates to what you're talking about, but I just got back we went to NATO, and we had a brief over there, and then we were in Turkey, and I'm concerned about, whether we are prepared, and the number of platforms that we have is, you mentioned how they're going to be diminished, and yet the tempo of ops and the op plans and everything else, it's one after another and after another. And it's like, can we actually cover all these contingencies or all these spots? And when I was in NATO, and they put the fear of God in me about Putin and, quite frankly, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. And whether we have the platforms, obviously we discussed the Med, but I was thinking of the Baltic, which I thought was a very, very shallow area that is limited in terms of what you could bring in there. But they've been running operations, and of course, as somebody that's involved in NATO, the big threat is the attack on one of those smaller countries way at the end, close to Russia. Do we factor that into the platforms, or maybe have the misconception that we're building everything for everything all over the world, and whether we have to be more selective in our future plans based upon the contingency or the threats as they are evolving? And I don't mean to dwell on it too much, but 5 years ago, 10 years, the Berlin Wall came down, and it's safe there, and we'll do a kumbaya. Everything has changed in a remarkably short period of time. So could you address that, please? Thank you.
Yes, sir. I'll start and ask for Admiral Malloy and General Gluck to add. Let me first describe that when we design our ships, when we set the requirements and do the design, we're looking at a ship that's service life is going to extend 30 to 40 years on average. And it's impossible to anticipate all the types of operations that any ship is going to be called upon in that service life. So to the extent practical, we look for general purpose designs to be able to configure and be employed to deal with the full range of operations that the ship will be called upon. With specific regard to the regions that you've just described, where you have to deal with shallow water, restricted areas, and what we refer to as the littorals. In fact, earlier, about 10 years ago, we embarked on this thing called the littoral combat ship, specifically shallow draft, modular design, so that you could have payloads that you could flex and adjust to depending on what the mission was, to deal with those regions where our larger capital ships, from destroyers, cruisers, carriers, et cetera, would not be able to penetrate. So in general, we look for general purpose ships that you can adjust their mission as the threat moves, with specific regards to those regions where our larger blue water Navy was not designed for operations. We did add to our fleet the littoral combat ship that has that shallow draft modular payload capability and frankly speed, which is your ally in those close-in regions.
Didn't we cut back on those, though, in terms?
No, in fact.
Are we going forward with the?
We capped the modular version of the LCS at 32 ships.
Yep.
This, frankly, the Secretary of Defense was concerned that we're going to build out to 52 LCSs. That will be about 1/6 of our entire battle force being this modular configuration. So he tasked us with coming back with something that's quote-unquote more frigate-like, more multi-mission. And so, in fact, what we have going forward, first 32 ships will be the modular littoral combat ship. The last 20 will be a multi-mission, still some modularity, but a multi-mission modified version of the LCS that gives it a wider range of operations.
The only other part I'd add, sir, is as we look at the changing demographics of the world, the threat does morph and where we have to go. But as Mr. Secretary Stackley pointed out was the ability of our ships to flex in terms of payloads and weapons. So the concern on deployability and the combatant commanders, you're absolutely right. And that's one reason why, as I mentioned earlier, was PB-16 is the minimum to be able to do this. We need the funds to be able to take our 285 ships right now and build them to 308 by the end of the fit-up to be able to continue to support that. 10 years ago, we had 300-something ships, but we only had about 70 deployed. Now we have 100 deployed out of 300 or 280 ships. So we are at the point of a ship comes back, immediately it rests, it does maintenance, and it just recycles back again to deploy. And so all the combatant commanders want them. So it's important that PB-16 reflects we need to keep building the ships, we need to continue to maintain them, and we need to be able to make them available. And that's already the combatant commanders to develop war plans or option plans with them. But the response is there. Within a short period of Crimea attack, we had a DDG in the Mediterranean. Within a short period in ISIL, we responded with an aircraft carrier, and for the first 54 days, until we had country clearance, the only people bombing and attacking were American airplanes off of an aircraft carrier. So the flexibility of sovereignty of Navy and naval research, or naval support vessels, is the Navy and Marine Corps team can respond very flexibly.
Thank you.
About, if I could, sir, about 10 years ago, we used to have a Marine Expeditionary Unit that was deployed with their amphibious ready group to the Mediterranean. But due to lack of capacity now, they're no longer stationed there. About the only opportunity you get is when they pass through, perhaps on their way to CENTCOM. And I mean, that is a great opportunity, having been a MU commander during that period of time. You know, that's a great opportunity to build partnerships with our coalition partners over there, the members of NATO, to exercise with them, to check our interoperability and to be able to demonstrate that that cohesive team that we have.
Okay. Gentleman yields back. Ms. Gabbert's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thanks for your service and for being here today with us. I just wanted to ask about a problem that I think is well known and well recognized as we try to find the appropriate and effective solution to bring our Marines to shore safely, quickly, and from farther distances than I think ever before. As we look at some of the solutions that are being offered, I know there are many people who are working towards that. So far, it seems to be done a little bit of an ad hoc kind of scattershot way where certain people may be bringing solutions to one element or another, but really not focusing on overall integration. I know of some who are working to solve the high water speed problem specifically and working with the Marine Corps in order to figure out how to do that. But my question is, how can the Marine Corps leverage existing research and investment in existing capabilities, specifically talking about the ACV, to help design the next generation? Lieutenant General, please.
Well, thanks for that question. It's really about the integration of all these capabilities. It's a family of systems is what we're talking about. And that's been our approach as we've come up with our capstone concept of Expeditionary Force 21. It's about that family of systems out there that's going to give us that leap ahead capability. If you remember in my opening comments, I made a point about there's not going to be any one transformational capability that we're going to see over the surface. It's going to be the capabilities that exist today and how we better integrate them together to be able to give us that leap ahead capability. So, for example, in a sea base, as you talk about, where due to the A2AD threat, the sea base is actually getting pushed out further. Exactly. And it's going to depend on the time and place as to how far that sea base will have to go. But within that sea base, not only will have naval service combatants, but you're also going to have members of the Maritime Preposition Fleet, so the AFSB, the MLPs, the Joint High-Speed Vessels, and those are all going to be integrated because they're going to have a capability that we need at the sea base, where we're able to do at-sea arrival and assembly of the force in the sea base and be able to transfer those loads between combatant ships and some of the maritime preposition ships. So that's a real leap ahead, and we're pushing full speed ahead on that and working into experimentation. But when our concept has been for the past 25 years, ship to the objective maneuver. So your sea base can move around. You launch your vertical assault and your surface assault, from wherever you move the sea base to.
Right.
So as we move to the future, actually, when we came up with the concept, there were actually three, it was called the triad, and it was the LCAC, it was the V-22, and it was the AAAV is what we were looking at. Those were the three capabilities that we needed to be able to perform that. As you know today, the V-22 is a success story. And so that, from a vertical perspective, we can go ahead and insert forces hundreds of miles behind the enemy lines and be able to do that. On the connector side, on the surface side, it's really going to come down to connectors and connecting from the sea base to get to the shore. And so how we best integrate those capabilities to make them, to get the greatest effect. You know, once again, we're not going to go ahead and try to find where the enemy's strongest. We're going to find where the enemy's weakest, and that's where we'll exploit it. So, I mean, when you look at the family of systems over the surface, you know, you're talking about the LCACs, the LCUs, you got your the Joint High-Speed Vessel, which we're doing some research on right now to be able to put a ramp on it so that we could potentially launch vehicles while at sea with the Joint High-Speed Vessel. And then, of course, we're going to modernize our AAVs, about 392 of them, and then the ACVs will take up the rest of our, not the amphibious lift, but will provide us the armored lift that we need once we get ashore.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any additional comment on that?
I think General Gluck covered it pretty well. The only thing I would add, he touched on the LCACs. In fact, we've gone through a service life extension for the LCACs, and this year we're moving forward with the next, what's referred to as ship-to-shore connector, and that features prominently in our budget across the fit-up as we ramp up production for that new connector.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlemen, once again, thank you so much for being here. I know we're living in some very, very dangerous times, very frustrating times. We appreciate you guys hanging in there and doing the work that you do. I also know sometime in a hearing like this, as you know, the important thing for us is preparing this transcript so we can use it for our markups. Our members are wonderful members, but they each run in different lanes, and they may have unintentionally left out something that you think is very important that we need to get on that record. So I'd like to give each of you a few minutes to wrap up in any way that you need to, anything that you feel you need to clarify or that we didn't get on the record. And just in that process, the only thing I would ask you to do is share a little bit about the cruisers and where you see us going with those, as we've expressed a concern that perhaps we may, we don't see that in the POM, and that gives us a little bit of concern, but I'd like to make sure that we're committed to that modernization to do it. So, Admiral Malloy, if we could start with you, and thank you once again for being here, and any closing comments you'd like to offer us.
First, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to close with, and I'll get to the cruisers, is that, as we point out, was sequestration or any attempt to adjust to a BBA law for 16, we found would be highly detrimental to the Department of Defense and especially the Department of the Navy. We have a number of items that we are continue to move ahead in this Navy. The LCS is important to us, the Ohio Replacement Program we've already talked about. So the whole gamut of what the fleet is laying in those aircraft carriers. And what I look for as the Navy's Chief Financial Officer is adequate, predictable, and timely budgets. And so far, we've barely got adequate, and it's been real efforts out of this committee and other committees to make sure that we have something. But what they've defined as being adequate is $25 billion short. Predictable is not very high, except the 1 year that we had the 15 was now, I view as a high watermark of stability, but it's $11 billion short of where I told Lucino he needed to be. So I don't need more predictability like that. I'll be like General Pyrrhus in southern Italy here in 479 facing the Romans, and one more battle like this, I'm lost. And I need a timely budget, and it's certainly been less of a shorter CR this year, but I was budget officer for 4 years and N8 for another one, and every year we've had a CR of various lengths. So we need to move ahead on that. We really need to have it, and I appreciate your process, Mr. Chairman, and your committee to move ahead this year to say is we're going to move ahead of budget. When I look at the cruisers, I will tell you everyone is, we're all in on doing that. We have 2 ships that we're starting this year. We have 2 more. There was a question about what did we do when that law came out, 246. When that law finalized in early December, we had about 1 week to lock this budget. In that period of time, we could not use the SMOSIF where we're planning to use it for operations and maintenance. The Navy made adjustments as we locked the budget to add just a little bit under $500 billion for operations and maintenance for the other 7 ships that we expected to be in this phase modernization program, but not. So we adjusted the program to fit and comply to the law. The SMOSA fund will pay for modernization through the fit-up. What we have to go back now and look at as we develop the next POM, and we're looking for signals from the Hill, would be is there other additions to SMOSIF? Can we count on that account, and what can we do about trying to support this law? Because we acknowledge that we want the ships, we're taking care of them, and we need that cruiser plan. But we also want to make sure we extend the life of them so that we can have those cruisers for a long time, sir.
Yeah,
That's
thank you,
it, sir.
Admiral. General Gluck, thank you again for all your service and for being here. Any closing comments you'd like to get on the record?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Last year, I requested your support in funding flexibility for the amphibious combat vehicle way ahead. And because of your support, the amphibious combat vehicle program is poised for successful transition to our RFP by the end of March. Secondly, I requested your support on the development of high water speed capability through an aggressive science and technology program, and that is moving out smartly. Lastly, I requested your increased amphibious ship investment in both platforms and maintenance. And today we have a funded LPD 28, a defined way ahead on the LXR, and programmed approximately $1 billion for amphibious maintenance and modernization across the fit-up. So I want to say thank you. But I also come with my hat in hand. This year, I request your support in both continued amphibious ship and alternate platform investment, particularly in the LXR and in the increased capability of the LHA-8. Continued support of our combat vehicle strategy to replace the 40-year-old plus AAVs that we have in the inventory. And lastly, your support for our science and technology, continued efforts to gain high water speed. Thank you.
Thank you, General. And Ms. Secretary, we'll give you the final word.
Yes, sir. Very briefly, we've spent a lot of this hearing discussing concerns with sequestration, the impact of sequestration. What we have delivered to the Hill is the program, the budget that we believe is essential to meet the nation's security requirements from the Navy Marine Corps perspective. The impact of the last several years of 2013 sequestration, the BBA's impact in 14 and 15, you've heard us describe that we've pulled away from the capabilities that we believe we need, either in terms of timeliness or in terms of capacity, and it's had a similar impact in terms of the industrial base. So our first and foremost, we want to provide you the information and the armor that you need in order to fight the sequestration and BCA in 16 and out. Our first priority is to hold on to the program that we've delivered to the Hill, and we want to provide you the best information that you need to be able to support that. Much of this hearing has been on shipbuilding. That's the nature of your Navy Marine Corps team. We are on path today to get to a 300-ship Navy by the 2019 timeframe. In the interim, we're working our ships hard. Their deployment ratios, their dwell time, the length of their deployments is bringing a lot of wear and tear to the force, and you're starting to see that stack up in the depots. So the ship count is critical because the demand for presence is not going to go down. So you have been our partner for your time here on the committee in terms of supporting our shipbuilding requirements, and we look forward to continuing down that path. We need these ships. Their demand overseas is not going to go down. It's only going to increase. When you look on the 2020 timeframe, we're not looking at 100 ships being deployed. We're looking at 115 ships deployed. And the greatest challenge, the greatest threat we have to that today is the threat of sequestration. So let us know how we can help you in your battles here in the halls of Congress to try to reverse what poses a great threat to our Navy Marine Corps team.
Well, thank you all. Thank you for all the team that work with you, and to members of the committee, thank you. And with that, we're adjourned.